In this session, we will look primarily at the regulatory guidelines and directives to manage potential problems of liquidity in any financial system. Liquidity problems arise primarily for two reasons: either because of a sudden unforeseen withdrawal of deposits by customers, or two, sudden drawdown against loan commitments by customers. To meet this sudden outflow of funds and the consequent likely adverse impact on liquidity, financial asset companies, particularly banks, are mandated by the central bank of the country to maintain sufficient liquid assets. By that we mean assets that can be turned into cash at short notice, at a low transaction cost, without any loss in the value of the asset. The most liquid asset is, of course, cash, followed by government securities. Since both cash and government securities offer no returns or low returns, banks have to trade off between profitability and liquidity when maintaining cash and government securities on the asset side of their balance sheet. Banks do not, however, have a choice in this regard in view of the primary need to ensure short-term liquidity in the financial system as mandated by the central bank of the country. Reserve requirements refer to the amount of liquid assets to be maintained by the bank as mandated by the central bank, either as cash in the vault of the bank or as balances in its current account with the central bank, or as investments in government securities. Almost all central banks mandate a reserve ratio, and by that we mean the amount of liquid assets to be maintained as a percentage of customer deposits in the bank's books. Do remember, these customer deposits comprises either demand deposits represented by the balances in the savings account and current account of the customers that can be withdrawn anytime by the customers, or time deposits such as fixed deposits and certificate of deposits. Time deposits are less risky from a liquidity perspective, since they have a specific maturity date and closure prior to the maturity date is not permitted. And in most cases, if there is a premature closure, the customer will be required to pay a penalty. While central banks in some countries have mandated that reserve requirements will only be a percentage of the demand deposits, that means current account and savings account only, several central banks around the world have included time deposits as well in computing the reserve requirements. Furthermore, in several countries where the reserve requirements include time deposits as well, regulators have implemented a two-tier structure for the reserve requirements, one called the cash reserve and the other called the statutory liquidity reserve. While cash reserve represents the cash held in the vault or in the bank's current account with the central bank, statutory liquidity reserves is normally held as investment in government securities that are highly liquid and can be converted to cash at very short notice. To further clarify and understand the computation and maintenance of reserve requirements, in the next couple of sessions we will work through the logic and the arithmetic of computing reserve requirements in one emerging country, that is India, and one developed country, that is the United States.